Here to talk about basically what happened in my case in Raw Deal. This is Larry Pollock, Underground Performance Gym in Ventura, California. You can visit our website, undergroundperformancegym.com. We have all kinds of great merchandise on there, as well as one of the best gyms in probably all of California and the United States. So be sure to check out undergroundperformancegym.com. So today I'm here to talk about basically what happened in the case my case in Raw Deal, which was the name of the operation, the sting operation set by the US DEA in 2006 and 2007. There is an entire story going from the very beginning, from when I was a kid, was in prison young, and details on what happened. I'll summarize that briefly for viewers who haven't seen this, but I want to focus more on the technical details of the case today, so people can really understand what happened, not just myself personally, but in general. So to give you some background, back in 2005, there was a operation called Balco. This was owned by a guy named Victor Conte up in the Bay Area, and he had a nutrition lab, supplement company, but he was manufacturing designer steroids that were being used by baseball players and in the Olympics with some Olympic athletes. Barry Bonds was involved, and several other Olympic athletes as well. Anyways, they prosecuted them, they indicted them in federal court, and it became a whole huge national thing. Anyways, Joe Biden was involved. He was one of the main people pushing for legislature on steroids, anabolics in general. And against the recommendations of the FDA, they passed the Anabolic Control Act and made steroids a Schedule III controlled substance. Shortly after that happened, there was another operation. There was a Dr. Cohen, I don't know if he was a real doctor or not, but he called himself Dr. Cohen, who ran labs down in Mexico. The labs he ran were Dankel, Quality Vet, and Animal Power. They were supposedly 3 different labs, but they were actually all his. And for about 10 years, he was supplying about 75% of the US market, according to statistics, and I believe that's probably correct. So shortly after the Balco scandal, they managed to get Dr. Cohen to cross the border to meet an undercover informant, and they arrested him. And he owned apparently a lot of property in the United States, and they agreed to not press charges and not confiscate all his property if he agreed to shut down all his operations. So that's what he did. Fast forward, I decided, well, first of all, the market went dry right after Dr. Cohen got busted. Within a few months, there were literally no quality anabolics to be found anywhere. Everything was fake or just not legit. So I had the idea. I was a distributor for them for a number of years. I would go down to Mexico. They would drive them back across for me of Quality Vet, Dankel, and Animal Power. Since I didn't have this anymore, I had the idea to go down there and open my own lab. And keep in mind, even though it was a Schedule III controlled substance in the United States, it was still legal in Mexico. You could go down there and get permits and do all this. So I figured as long as I operated within Mexico, I should be good to go. So I did that. I went down to Mexico, opened the lab, and initially just sold to the local pharmacies in the area, and then people would cross the border, come down and get their stuff, and they'd bring them back however they got them back. And within a short period of time, actually within a year, we grew from almost nothing to one of the biggest labs, maybe the biggest lab in the country or even the world, next to British Dragon. At the very end, we were doing $100,000 in business a week. So meanwhile, Operation Raw Deal took place. The idea of Operation Raw Deal was that they wanted to, what they said in the newspapers is that they were trying to clean up steroids and anabolics for the Beijing Olympics so that it would be a fair Olympics. Well, this was nonsense because really it had nothing to do with Olympics. So they set out around the world, rounding up people from different labs, all the top labs, literally around the world, even British Dragon. They arrested British Dragon English citizens in Thailand, extradited them to the United States to stand trial, and basically all the labs were rounded up. And I knew they were coming for me because, well, I had a distributor that had tried to set me up. He had been a distributor. I'd never met with him in person to do transactions, but it was through mail order. And he decided he didn't want to do mail order anymore. He wanted to meet in person. I knew this was a setup right away. So I refused the meeting. But shortly after that, I got a letter at a P.O. box from the DEA saying they wanted me to come in for questioning, as if we're going to really go in for questioning. Also, I had given this person my Belizean bank account information so he could wire funds to the Belizean bank, because previous to that, we were doing all through Western Union and MoneyGram, and it was getting harder and harder to get that kind of money through Western Union and MoneyGram. Right after I gave this person that information, I get a call from Belizean Bank saying that I have 2 weeks to get my money out of the Belizean Bank, or it's going to be confiscated by the U.S. Apparently, they were tipped off, and that was the situation. So I had nowhere to really send that money, so I said I wired all the money to Hong Kong and just bought more product, because that's the only thing I could do to get the money out of there that fast. Fast forward, I know that they're looking for me. I contact Rick Collins, who is a big-time attorney in the United States, who represented a lot of anabolic cases, and I told him my situation, and I told him I wanted to retain him. He told me, well, you can't really retain me because you don't have any charges against you. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some. It's coming. So how about I just give you $10,000, just hold on to it just in case. And so he said, okay. Anyways, I knew that they were looking for me, but I was down in Mexico, hidden away as far as I knew. And really everything was going on in the United States. So I really didn't want to go back to the United States where it was all going on. In hindsight, maybe I should have gone back, probably somewhere else, Central America, or any place. But I thought I was safe where I was at in Mexico. So meanwhile, I was watching all the busts go down in the United States. There was busts going down in Dallas, New York, like I said, British Dragon, all these busts were happening. I believe I was the very last one to finally get caught. So, as it turns out, the U.S. couldn't just go into Mexico and get me for two reasons. One, I was outside their jurisdiction, and two, they didn't really have any case against me. They'd never caught me in the United States selling one pill, a vial, nothing. So what they did is they contacted the Mexican police, and the Mexican police sent the Ariel and Phoenix Cartel to come and pick me up. They came in the middle of the night, like full SWAT outfits with machine guns, and they took me. They held me for 16 days. Again, I could get into all the details, but that's saved in a future video. And at the end, you can ask questions. But anyways, there's other videos out there that's talked all about the kidnapping, the details of it, and all what happened. But I want to focus on like I said, raw deal. So they get me, and they held me for 16 days. During that time, I had a safe in the ground that had about $3 million in it, and they needed the combination of the safe. So they did some torturing, pulled my toenail out with the pliers, some different things. And eventually they were able to get the safe out by using some kind of torch to dig it out of the ground. So they got my money. They also ransacked my entire house. And in the court documents, it shows that on the same day that they were digging the safe out of the ground in my house, the DEA was in there documenting the whole thing. So they were all in this together. So they had me for 16 days, and during that time they were torturing, killing other people, and I saw what was going on. I was looking for an opportunity from the time they got me to how to get out of there. And I had been watching the guards all along, and during the night, the jefes, the people in control, would come and do their torturing and interrogations and stuff like that. But during the day, they just had teenagers with machine guns guarding us. And later at night, when the jefes would leave, every night I realized these teenagers would go to sleep. Now, keep in mind, I was handcuffed and blindfolded, but I was looking out of my blindfold. I was peeking out of it the whole time, trying to see where I was and figuring out what I was going to do and how to get out of there. And I realized after they had killed what was reported as a rival gang member or something like that the night before, that every night they would go to sleep. And I was told if I wanted to go to the restroom, I had to whistle. And so I would whistle and they wouldn't get up. So I had been watching them. Like I said, they were going to sleep. So one night I got up, took myself to the restroom because they weren't waking up. And I was looking at them, and I had been talking to Oscar. We knew they had machine guns because we heard them during the day playing with their machine guns. And I was talking to Oscar, and he had this idea that, we should take their machine guns and, shoot them or whatever. But as I was walking around looking at them while they were sleeping, I didn't see the machine guns. I assumed they were sleeping on top of them. But what I realized is that when I had gone to the restroom, I'd gone down a different hallway, and there was a stairwell going down to a garage that had an exit door. And I told Oscar, he was a kid that was in there with me, we can just walk right out past them and out of here. And he said, oh no, it's too risky. And I said, look, staying here is too risky. You see what's happening. So anyways, I literally tiptoed right past their nose, down the stairway into the courtyard. Shortly thereafter, Oscar showed up in the courtyard, and he was a real skinny guy. He was able to get his handcuffs off, and he told me help me scale the fence. So I picked him up from his feet. He scaled the fence. It was a wooden fence, and he came down on the other side, made a lot of noise. Dogs started barking in the neighborhood, and the only way out was a garage door that was an electric garage door. And initially I didn't want to push it because I didn't want to make noise, but at this point I didn't have a choice. So I pushed the electric garage door and I scooted out under there, and I took off running after Oscar down this cobblestone road in the middle of the night, probably 4 o'clock in the morning. We get to down the street, we saw a cab, tried to wave it down. The cab didn't stop, he drove away. We ended up running in through a bus depot, and somehow during the bus depot, Oscar went a different direction. I lost him. And I ended up running down a highway trying to flag down cars. And I get to a taco stand. And in the middle of the night, there's half a dozen guys in there eating tacos. I'm in my underwear and handcuffs with a rag on my head. I get in there and I said, I'm kidnapped. I need help. Can you get me to the border? And they're like, do you want us to call the police? I'm like, no, don't call police. The police are kidnappers. They understood that. I'm like, look, get me to the border, I'll pay you. These guys said, come on, let's go. They put me in the back of a van. We drove they said, what border you want to go to? I said, Oda Mesa, because I knew that I crossed those borders a lot, so I knew that was a shorter border. So we get to Oda Mesa border. The guys get out of the van. The border securities are giving them problems. I get out of the van, run up there, and I said, American citizen, let me in, kidnapped. And the guy looks at me strange, like, why are you dressed like this? I'm just like pretty much naked in my underwear. And I said, look, I'm kidnapped. I've got handcuffs on. So finally they did let me in, put a blanket around me, and gave me a sack lunch. And had an interview with the FBI. And I told them all about the kidnapping, but I didn't tell them anything about the steroids because he didn't ask. During that time, supposedly Mexican authorities showed up and they asked me to go back into Mexico to show them the safe house. And I told them I refuse, I'm not going to go with you. The FBI said, we can't make him go. So I didn't go. Shortly thereafter, the DEA showed up. And apparently the FBI didn't know anything about what was going on with the raw deal case. Because the DEA showed up and they said, we're going to take him from here. And the FBI says, what's going on? Is something you didn't tell me? Of course, I don't say anything. They just take me out the back door. Put me in a undercover vehicle, and they're driving me to the DEA headquarters up in San Diego. While we're driving, the DEA says to me, they're questioning me. They said, do you know John Romano? I said, I know of him. What do you think about him? I said, he's all right. They're saying, oh, this is a cult, this and that. I'm like, F you. Anyways, they said, you weren't really supposed to come back. There was a bodybuilder in the morgue. He was found dead, mutilated beyond recognition. We thought it was you. You weren't supposed to come back. So we get to DEA headquarters, and at that point, they had already picked up my wife because when I was at the border at San Ysidro, or actually Oda Mesa, they had called my brother, who was in contact with the FBI, and my wife at the time was with him, and they went to the border. And then they arrested my wife at the border as well. So I get up to the headquarters, and they take me out of the car, and they have my wife there, and for whatever reason, they put me in a room with my wife. I think they probably put me in there because they were listening, and they wanted to hear us say whatever we're going to say to each other. And I just told her, don't say anything. They said they had told her that he's really dirty and whatever. She said, I already told them I want my attorney. They sat me down and said, listen, you could help yourself, you could help your wife, you could tell us things. I said, how much time am I facing? They said, well, it could be 5 years. I said, could be. I said, what am I being charged with? He said, could be this, could be that. I said, I want my attorney. So at that time, another guy tried to get belligerent, but the guy said he invoked his right, that's it. So they took me to the Federal Detention Center up in San Diego. We were there for a few days. My wife was able to bond out. I think it was like a $100,000 bond for her. But they wanted no bond. They were arguing no bond for me. And anyways, my mother had come down and my family was there at this point when I went to court for my bond hearing. And I had a really good attorney that Rick Collins sent in for me. And he argued bail. They were arguing no bail, saying I was a flight risk, international flight risk, blah, blah, blah. But they ended up giving me a $500,000 security bond on my mother's home. So she put up the home as security, and I got out on a $500,000 bond. So at that point, I was ordered to stay in Camarillo because that's where the house was, and basically stay there while the case was pending. We both had ankle bracelets on, and I actually competed right after that. I had planned to compete in the Excalibur prior to getting arrested, and now I had this ankle bracelet on, and I went and competed anyways. I really did it because I wanted to send a message to the DEA. I'm saying like, okay, you got me, you got this ankle bracelet on me, but here I am, I'm on stage competing. So I went down to Joe Lindsay and I said, can I compete? I had this ankle bracelet on. He said, go ahead. And there's pictures on the internet. You can see me competing with the ankle bracelet on. So we were out fighting that case for about 3 years. The idea of my attorneys, well, first of all, let me back up. I had to have an attorney that was local in the district where the case was from. And the case was being run by a guy named Jeff Nedrow and a Kaczynski guy out of the Bay Area in San Jose. So I went to San Jose with my wife to interview the top attorneys. The first attorney we interviewed was Barry Bond's attorney, and he told me the guy you need is a guy named Paul Meltzer. He's the attorney for you. So I went to Paul Meltzer, met with him, and he agreed to take my case. It was pretty expensive, and I paid him, and my wife also had to have an attorney. So we chose one of his colleagues who Paul recommended, another attorney, and I met with both of the attorneys together. Now keep in mind, I was paying both of them. I paid Paul $100,000, and I believe hers was $50,000. So it was $150,000 for both of us. And I told them up front, here's the deal. I'm paying both you guys. I'm not ratting on anybody. She's not ratting on anybody. We're not going to rat on each other. So don't even bring it up. They said, understood, no problem. So we went through 3 years of continuances. The idea was just to push it out, stretch it out as long as possible. So eventually, it would be in the past, and by the time we actually got to whatever stage of the case, it wouldn't be in the newspaper anymore, big headlines and so forth. Originally, by the way, they said international conspiracy, 300 people arrested around the world, and a big giant steroid ring, as if there was all these different steroid manufacturers all operating together. The truth of the matter was, I didn't know any of those people. I knew of them, but I didn't know any of them personally. I'd never done business with any of them. So that was just made up story for the news. So they ultimately were charging me with conspiracy. They said conspiracy to distribute, then said me and my wife conspired to distribute. And supposedly some guy in Northern California got caught with some steroids, just a few bottles, and some other recreational drugs, meth and marijuana and whatever. And some of the products were ours. That's what they said. The only case they claimed to have was, they said they had a picture of my wife in a post office mailing a package on a day that supposedly this package was sent to somewhere in Northern California to this person who they busted. I don't think that's real. I think that's BS, because we never dealt with individual people. We had basically 5, maybe 6 distributors, and that's all we dealt with. We never sold to end users, and our minimum order at the time was $20,000. So there was no way we were sending a package to some guy in Northern California. That was just made up. But anyways, we get to a part, we've been dragging this case on, and during that time I got in a little car accident. Nothing happened, but they tried to give me 3 strikes for felony hit and run, great bodily injury. Turned out there was no injury, there was no damage to the car, nothing actually happened. So that thing, I got dismissed, I got let out, but they were trying to hold me in there on bond, or actually revoke my bond so they could keep me in, so they could pressure my wife into testifying against me. But after 3 months of that, holding me as long as they could on the car accident, they had to let me out because there was nothing. I get a phone call from a former worker who was somebody who had was just a bottler for me that I had fired 6 months before we got taken by the cartel because he was a meth head. And this guy is talking to me on the phone, telling me he was a person that originally showed the DEA and the cartel or whoever where I was. He's the one that knew where my house was. So this guy is on the phone. This is almost 3 years later. He's calling me out of the blue, telling me if anything happens to me, he's trying to get me to talk. I knew he was doing that. I literally hung up the phone, but this idiot kept talking to the recording. And he's saying all kinds of stuff. And this basically proved, that the DEA was in cahoots with the cartel, because here, obviously this guy is working with the DEA now, and he's the guy that set things up with the cartel, and he's calling me. So I got that tape and I took it to my attorney and I said, look, this is proof that, what they did down there in Mexico. And, I want you to take this to them and tell them, dismiss this case. And they come back the next day and they said, okay, they're offering you a deal, 24 months. And the deal is, if you take this 24 months, your wife gets off. And I always told her, if there was ever a problem, anything went down, I would make sure she didn't get in trouble. I originally wanted to fight the case, but given the circumstances, I said, okay, I'll take the 24 months, and she walks. So they said, okay, as part of the deal, what we want you to do is they want you to tell on yourself. So they want you to tell them what you did. And I'm like, why? They already know what I did. They have everything. I mean, there was a thing out of Canada called Hushmail that everybody back then was using. It was an encrypted email server, and all our communications were through Hushmail. So originally, we were told that Hushmail was a safe way to communicate, but during Raw Deal, the U.S. government went to the Canadian government, and they went to Hushmail, and they basically confiscated all their records, and Hushmail just gave it all up. So they had everything. And I'm like, they know everything, so what am I going to, I have nothing to tell them. Well, they just want to hear it from you. So they get me in a room, and they're like, so tell us, what happened? And I'm like, yeah, I did this, I made the stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then they try and implicate my brother in the situation. Say, asking me like, what did he have to do with it? And he had nothing to do with anything. So I said to my attorney, can I speak to you privately? We go in the other room. I'm like, hey, what the hell is going on here? He goes, you're fucking this all up. I'm like, what do you mean I'm fucking it up? What? I told you up front, I'm not telling on anybody. And he's like, well, let's go back in there. So we go back in there. He says, can we continue? They ask me some more stupid questions. I basically don't tell them anything of any relevance. And at the end, the two DEA agents say, well, we don't feel like that we got anything out of this that we didn't already know. And Jeff Nedrow, the head prosecutor guy, he said, well, that wasn't part of the deal. It wasn't that kind of deal. It just wasn't. So anyways, I get sentenced to the 24 months. And at the time, while I was out on bond, they told me as part of my federal bond, I had to have a job. So I could run around Camarillo looking for something to do. There was really nothing there I wanted to do, so I just opened up a gym. And we ran that gym for a couple of years, and then I told my wife, I'm going to go in and do this time, and, you stay here and run the gym, and, when I get out, we'll get back to life. So she did run the gym for about a year. I found out later that during that time she was pocketing all the money and not paying the rent and selling equipment and all kinds of stuff. So she basically just let the gym go. And after a year, she took off. So anyways, I get out, and after I did 14 months on the 24 months, because you have some good behavior time and whatever. Oh, and I got 6 months halfway house. That's right. So I had a little bit of good behavior in the 6 months halfway house. So I get out, and I go to the halfway house, and I had to get a job to be out of the halfway house. So I went to Gold's Gym and got a job as a trainer, and I did that just to stay out of the halfway house and to have some sort of a job. So anyways, like I said, there's a lot more to the story and details, but I want to get to some of the actual legal part of the case. Because recently my integrity has been scrutinized by individuals that just want to slander my name. And so what I'm doing today is I'm going on record with my court documents, which I don't know if anybody ever does this, but I am doing it. And this is my complete sentencing report and letter from Rick Collins explaining the report. You will be able to read all the documents yourself. So as part of the federal court system, after sentencing, your plea agreement is sealed. I don't know why it's that way. That's just what they do in federal court. Somebody insinuated that, well, they're sealing your documents because you're an informant. That's furthest thing from the truth. So I have my sentencing report, and I'm going to go through it. And first, I want to read this letter from Rick Collins that basically explains what's in these documents that you'll be able to see. And this is a letter from Rick Collins, who's an attorney on my case. Oh, by the way, I had 3 attorneys. I had Paul Meltzer, he was my attorney. I had the other guy, my wife's attorney. And I had Rick Collins looking over both of them to make sure that, everything went right. So here's what Rick has to say. Attached, please find 2 publicly accessible documents pulled from Pacer. The first is your docket report, which sets forth all the filings in connection with your case. Curiously, the plea agreement is in fact sealed. The court alone decides what is sealed and what is not sealed. But it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why. Paul Meltzer later told me that's what they do. Paul Meltzer knows. The other document is a sentencing memo filed by the government. In it, the government asks for a sentence that is slightly higher than the guideline advises. This is the opposite of what happens with a cooperator. When a person cooperates, the government recommends a lower sentence than the guideline advises. So based on that factor, it is pretty clear that you did not cooperate. Further, as a second factor, when a person cooperates, the government files a sealed document after the guilty plea, but just shortly before sentence. This is a motion of downward departure, pursuant issue USSG 5K1.1. The record will show a sealed filing that is unexplained. That did not happen in your docket. So for those 2 reasons, it is certain to anyone in the justice system that you did not cooperate. But finally, you in fact received a sentence that is more than the guideline advised. Again, this is wholly inconsistent with cooperation. And this will be posted also, this letter, so that you can read it from Rick Collins. I have here the docket and the sentencing report. So here is my sentencing report. Introduction. The United States hereby submits its sentencing memorandum in the above referenced case and recommends that the court find an adjusted offense level of 10 and the sentenced defendant, Pollock, to term of 24 months imprisonment. This sentence is slightly above the high end of the applicable guideline range under United States sentencing guidelines. The United States concurs with the probation officer's findings of a base offense level of 10 as the appropriate base offense level resulting from Pollock's involvement in large-scale distribution of anabolic steroids and human growth hormone over the internet. The United States also agrees to 2-level upward adjustments is required for this offense because of the offense conduct involved distribution of anabolic steroids and human growth hormone by means of the internet computing service, resulting in an adjustment offense level of 12. The United States further agrees with the calculation by the United States Probation Office, providing that a 2-level downward adjustment for acceptance of responsibility. In other words, because I took the deal. The above described guidelines calculations result in a guideline level of 10 and a guideline range of 15 to 21 months. In light of defendant's criminal history, the United States requests that the court find a slightly upward variation to the appropriate and impose a sentence of 24 months. This sentence is consistent with the plea agreement entered between the parties pursuant to federal R crime P and is appropriate under the facts and the circumstances of the case. So you'll be able to read all this. It's going to be posted for you. You can read it yourself. If anybody knows about like Aaron Singerman and what happened with Redcon 1 and Blackstone Labs and that whole thing, he became an informant, and what did they do? They let him out. Okay, I got more time than the sentencing guideline, and I did that time. So obviously I didn't cooperate, because if I did, I wouldn't have done any time. They offered me to do no time, and I didn't accept it. So here it is, black and white. You guys can all read it for yourself. Again, it'll be posted. Also, I will be doing a Q&A at the end of this video. You guys are welcome to ask questions. I'll answer them straightforwardly, open, honest, completely transparent. Whatever you ask, I will answer it, because I have nothing to hide. And I've said from day one, everything I said is the truth. And here's the document. If you have a question about it, read it yourself. That's it for today's video. There'll be more in upcoming videos in the future. Thank you for your time.